have never met a bingo board that I didn't want to participate in. So when Alexis from Alexis Fully Booked put out a mystery thriller bingo board, I was like, how can I use this? How can I use this as someone who used to read a lot of thriller and mysteries and has backed away from the genre a little bit over the last couple of years, focusing on fantasy and romance and fantasy romance. And I realized this was the perfect way to tackle a huge chunk of my physical TBR. I have been trying to read down my physical TBR, get to books that have been sitting here for years, unread, waiting for their day in the sun. And I figured this challenge was perfect because a good chunk of my unread TBR is thrillers and mystery. I used to read it a lot. I backed away a little bit. I still pick them up occasionally, but not as fast as I was hauling them at one point. And I think this is a great way for me to force myself to read these books because I'm sure there are some really great treasures sitting on my shelves just waiting for me to pick it up. So when I looked at this bingo board, I knew I was only going to use books that I physically owned. Only my physical TBR. So I was like, what am I going to do if I don't have a book for that? And there was only one prompt that I did not have a book for, which just shows how many unread thrillers I physically own. Like, it's taking up a huge chunk of my TBR. That being said, I did use the prompts quite loosely, and I did kind of pull and twist on what would work for this prompt occasionally, especially as I was filling those last few prompts that I was struggling to fill. So if you see a stretch, just know it's because I really want to work on what I physically own. I don't want to have to haul any books or buy any books for this challenge. I want to read what I own. And I know Alexis is totally fine with that. Based off the video, based off what I know of watching her channel, that is not an issue at all. So anyway, let's dive into the bingo board. We're going to talk about all the books that I plan on reading as part of this bingo board. And we're going to talk about every single one. We are not going to talk about synopses because it's 25 books. So we're just going to talk about why they work for the prompt. The prompts were not that hard, so it wasn't like too difficult to find the prompts, like I said, but we'll talk about why the books I picked fit for those prompts. Let's just dive into the first line. So for the first line of the bingo board, we have BIPOC author. And for that, I'm going to read a book I got last year in December. So I've owned this book for almost a year. It was in my advent calendar last year. And I planned to have all these books read before this year. And I haven't. I have not done so. But that is The Other Black Girl by Zakaya Dahlia Harris. Honestly, I truly cannot even believe that I haven't read this book yet. It was very, very popular when it came out, and it was just one of those books that, again, I wasn't reading thrillers. You're going to actually notice that a lot of the thrillers I'm picking up were popular like 2 years ago because that was when I was buying them, and that was when I was reading them, and then I kind of stopped reading thrillers. So the very popular thrillers that are probably wonderful and I cannot wait to read are sitting on my shelves. I know there's going to be ones that I pull up as part of my TBR that you are going to gasp and clutch your pearls about that I haven't read. There's definitely one in particular that I know y'all are going to be like shocked that I haven't read it. And yeah, we're going to get to that one at some point. But obviously this is written by a author of color, a Black author, and I'm very excited to dive into this book and finally read it a year after hauling it. For House on the cover, I'm going to be reading Just Another Missing Person by Gillian McAllister. I loved Wrong Place, Wrong Time. And I gave that 5 stars when we read it for B&K Book Club. I was absolutely enamored with that book. And then I never read another book by the author, which is crazy. Why would you give an author 5 stars and then never read another book? Well, now is the time. I have heard not as great reviews about this one, but I don't care. It does have a building on the cover. I'm not 100% sure it's a house. It looks house-like, so I'm going to count it as a house. For Hidden Identity, we're actually going to go with another book I got last year in my advent calendar, and that was First Lie Wins. This was very, very popular last year. I think it was a Goodreads Choice nominee. Everyone was talking about this book when it came out, and I ended up getting it again in my advent. And I never read it. I mean, I got 24 books in 1 month. There was only so many of them I could read. And this one has now sat right next to The Other Black Girl for the entire year. So here's its time to shine. And why this works for Hidden Identity is something that I read in the synopsis. And it says The identity comes first, Evie Porter, and like she has to like learn who she is. So obviously that's not her real identity. She is like not really Evie Porter, and it even says Evie Porter does not exist. So I don't know how hidden that identity is, but obviously I'm assuming from what it's telling me in the synopsis, Evie Porter is not really Evie Porter. So whatever their real identity is hidden. For revenge, I'm going to be reading Darling Girls. I actually recently got this book, only maybe 6 months ago at a used book sale where all the books were like $2. How do you pass up books for $2? I can't. Can you? I couldn't. Couldn't be me. So anyway, I picked up Darling Girls and I'm using this for revenge strictly based off a line on the cover. This is what I'm saying. I know almost nothing about these thrillers. And that's because I like to go into thrillers blind. I really don't want to know much about a thriller because it takes the thrillingness away from it when I know too much. So I really, when filling this bingo board, looked at just enough to know where I could slot it, and that was pretty much it. So on this, it says revenge is sweet. Therefore, I assume revenge is part of the plot. Therefore, I used it for revenge. For 2+ POV, I'm going to be reading from another author that I read one book, really loved. I gave it a 4.5 star. I mean, still very highly rated, and then never read again. And that book was Local Woman Missing. That author is Mary Kubica, and the book I'm going to be using is The Other Misses. This has been on my TBR for a very long time. I have no idea how long it's sat here. I don't know where I got it. I don't know. It's been a very long time on the TBR, but it does have multiple POVs. I don't know how many, but I flipped through to see names. That's always a good way to find out if there's multiple POVs. Just look for names. If there's names, there's probably more than one POV. So there's Sadie. Let's flip until we find somebody else. There's Camille. Like there's at least 2, and that's all I needed. I'm sure there's probably more than 2, but I found 2, and it's 2+ POV. So I'm sure there was more, but I don't even know if there was more. Maybe those were the only 2, but it is still 2 and it counts. So that's what I'm going to use to finish off this first line of the bingo board. I absolutely love a book set in a small town. Now, mostly I read small town romances, but I am okay to read a small town mystery. And this book I bought this year as well, because last year in 2024, a bunch of my friends read this as part of a collab project that I was doing where we asked if we could trust our friends. And it was wildly popular amongst many of my booktube friends. And that is The Dry by Jane Harper. This is a mystery that is centered around like climate fiction, which I really do love a good cli-fi story. And this is someone basically coming back to their small town, but it definitely takes place in a small town because it says right here, sometimes it's the smallest of towns that hide the biggest secrets. And other than that, that's pretty much the only reason I knew it was in a small town. Thank you for Blurbs for really helping me out a lot with filling in this bingo board. Now this next one is 2026 release, and it is the only slot that I did not fill with a book because I'm trying to read my physical TBR. And frankly, I don't have any books that are going to be released next year on my physical TBR because it's not next year yet. I will inevitably probably pick up a very popular release at some point next year, and I will slot this in at that time. And luckily for me, Alexis did not have the rule that we couldn't use an author more than once. Honestly, even if that rule would have been on the board, I probably would have ignored it because again, I'm really trying to focus on my physical TBR and there are definitely some places where I would need to double up. This being one of them with Mary Kubica again and Every Last Lie for dual timeline. This is another one where I just flipped open the book to find out if it had dual timelines. They're usually fairly obviously marked. And it was, hold on, let me show you. So there's ones that say before, and then there's ones where there is no before. So this must be now and before, dual timelines, 2 timelines before and now. For Eat the Rich, I am going to be reading one of my favorite mystery authors. I do consider Ruth Ware a mystery author more than a thriller author. And I do think that is why I like Ruth Ware. It does tend to lead more to a murder mystery. And I have yet to read The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. This is set on a luxury cruise. That is the setting. If people are on a luxury cruise, I'm going to assume they are rich. There we go. There's my reasoning for putting this as Eat the Rich for a rich people problems book. I also think this is like a secluded setting murder mystery because obviously it's happening on a boat and those do tend to be favorites of mine. And I think Ruth Ware does them so, so well. When I was watching the video for the prompts for the bingo board and I heard the prompt big event, I knew exactly which book I was going to pick. It instantly came to mind, and that is The Last Party by Claire McIntosh. This is the first in a series, and I don't know if I'll continue with the series. We'll just have to see how I feel about it. This is like the last book of the month book that I even own. I have really read through my book of the month TBR over the years, but this is the last one that I have not read, and it's set around like a New Year's Eve party where at the party someone dies, and it is now up to this detective to figure out what happened at New Year's Eve. For new to you author, I'm going to be reading a book that I'm very excited to finally be getting on a TBR, and the author is Angeline Boulley, and that is The Firekeeper's Daughter. This is another very, very popular book that I just didn't read simply because I didn't own it, but I recently picked it up at a book swap event. I grabbed it and I was like, yes, I've been wanting to read this and I'm behind on reading this book. And then I saw this prompt and I was like, this is a mystery. This is a mystery. This could count. And I instantly was like, Angeline Boulley, done, dusted. I will be reading Firekeeper's Daughter. Again, I've heard nothing but fabulous things about this book and think this could really be a 5-star. I think even though this is a mystery, it's a very, very complex story. Not that mysteries aren't complex, they usually are, but this one has so many other layers of commentary and things going on that I think I'm going to be obsessed with this book. So for missing person, I've decided to slot in the book, the one that you are going to clutch your pearls that I have not read, and that is Taylor Adams and No Exit. I know. How have I not read this book? I had Sprint scheduled for this book 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I was supposed to read this online in 8 hours. And that day, I ended up in the hospital and having to have emergency surgery. So I had to cancel those. I'm fine, obviously. Clearly, I am fine. Everything was fine. But I had to cancel those sprints. And then I just never got to the book. Like, I just never got to reading it. And I think, honestly, that, like, tainted me wanting to pick it up because it was, like, tied to a not great time in my life. I remember all the books I was reading at that time. I think I DNF'd like all the ones I was in the middle of because I just wanted like a fresh start after I started to feel better. Now this one follows a person, Darby, and she's on a trip and she goes into a gas station. She comes out of a gas station and she sees a child in a cage in a car. And that is the person I'm calling a missing person because I'm assuming that this child is presumed missing by the people who are supposed to have this child, such as parents or, you know, whatever. That is my assumption. Whether that is true, I don't know. Again, we're going off very little glimpses of synopses for filling in these prompts. But I don't think anyone's going to be mad that I'm reading this book finally because really I should have already read this book. Like I am sleeping on this book. I need to read it. This is probably going to be 5 stars. I'm gladly putting it on this TBR. For you predicted the ending, obviously it's a little bit hard to know which thriller I'm going to predict the ending of. I'm sure it will happen a lot. Once you've read a significant amount of thrillers, it is fairly obvious sometimes what the endings are. Thrillers can be very tropey. If you've seen that trope multiple times, you can usually ascertain the twist. So, you know, there we go. But this author, I recently read a book by, and I really liked the book, but it was extremely, extremely obvious what the outcome was going to be. I guessed it very, very early. And that didn't take away from my like of the book. It really didn't. I still really liked the book. But I'm going to be reading Holly Jackson's The Reappearance of Rachel Price. I adore myself a Holly Jackson book. I adore Holly Jackson. I really, really do. There's very few Holly Jacksons I have not thoroughly enjoyed. This one, I think, is the one that people talk about the least. This is the one that has probably the lowest reviews. However, it's the only one I haven't read other than Killjoy, which is like a tiny novella. This is the only full-length novel I haven't read. So it was perfect timing to read it. And then I'm caught up on the author's backlist. Basically, I'm sure at some point this year I will also read Killjoy because that's a perfect one for like a quick readathon at some point. For a detective main character, I'm going to be reading The Word is Murder by Anthony Horowitz. This is a really interesting book where the author has written themselves into the book. So the detective in this book is Daniel Hawthorne, and Hawthorne needs a ghostwriter to document his life a Watson to his Holmes, and he chooses Anthony Horowitz. So that's how the author like gets pulled into the story. I do love a good Sherlock Holmes reference as well. I'm wondering if this is going to kind of settle on a retelling vibe. I don't know that to be the case. Again, I know very little. The only reason I even own this book is because I thought the concept was super, super interesting, but there is a detective, Daniel Hawthorne. And for the final prompt on this middle line, we have A Friend Wreck. I'm going to use a book that actually Kelsey and I were just talking about like 2 weeks ago on B&K Sprints. It was her second favorite Lisa Jewell. She's been telling me for years to read this book, and that is The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jewell. I have loved Lisa Jewell many times in the past, and one of my favorite Lisa Jewells is when she was, what is it called? When She Was Gone? Something like that. I think that's it. Anyway, that was like my favorite, and this has very similar tropes where we have a person going missing many, many years ago, and then it like comes back to light, and we're like kind of like refiguring out the crime. For isolated setting, I'm going to be reading Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is a family where I think a lot of people have killed people, but they're about to have a family reunion. And the family reunion is, according to the synopsis, where was it? At a remote mountain resort. Isolated setting. I think this is going to have a humor that I really appreciate. I don't know that to be the case, but we'll find out when I finally get to reading this. I actually already have the sequel to this book because it was given to me. So I'm really hoping I like this book so that there's a reason for me to read the book that was gifted to me by a family member after they read it. For the prompt of girls or woman in the title, I'm going to be reading a Megan Miranda book, which is kind of shocking because truly me and Megan Miranda have a sordid past. 2 books I didn't like, 1 book I did like. Maybe I'll like this one. It's okay, DNFs are going to count because it still gets it off my physical TBR. This is my way of figuring out if I like books or if they need to come off my TBR and be unhauled. Like, this is me getting books off my TBR. Whether I like them or not, it'll still get them off my TBR. And that is All the Missing Girls by Megan Miranda. Again, why does it count? Girls. I did not even read the synopsis. I have no idea what is happening in this book, but it works for the prompt. I have actually quite a few books with girls in the title in other places. We've seen a couple. We're going to see more, but this one worked and I'd already kind of slotted the others into other places. So, girls. And speaking of another book that does have girl in the title, but I'm using it for cold case, and that is Ruth Ware's The It Girl. I love Ruth Ware, so I'm totally okay to have multiple Ruth Wares on this TBR. Here is another one. And it has a cold case in it. I don't remember what the cold case even was now. Honestly, I read this last night while I was making a plan. What was it? What happened? Hold on. Let me remind myself of what exactly happened. Oh yes, I remember now. So Hannah and Will were in college. Her best friend April is murdered. Someone goes to jail for that murder. However, now a journalist is coming out of the woodwork saying that is not who killed your best friend. So it is kind of bringing the case back to light, and the case was like finished, but now it's a cold case because now we're like reinvestigating the murder. I'm again stretching this a little bit, but we know we're going to start getting into ones I stretched a lot, and I'm not going to point it out every time. Just know we've stretched to make physical TBR books work for this TBR. For LGBTQIA+ rep, I have a book I just bought in June. I bought it in June in anticipation for the Amazing Readathon. I was on the team with school settings. I love a dark academia book, and this one had representation, and I saw it in the bookstore, and I picked it up, and I didn't get a chance to read it during that time, but that is The After Dark by E. Latimer. This book I've heard almost nothing about anywhere, but I do know that it is sapphic. So therefore it works for this prompt, and it's set in a school. So it is dark academia, which I do love. So I think I may love this. And I'm actually really sad I didn't get to it in June. So I will get to it next year as part of this challenge. I'm sure some of you are looking at this book going, why do you own this? And you may think that's a horror, and it is. It's listed as a horror thriller, and I'm counting it as a thriller. But also, why do I own this? I actually have really enjoyed Grady Hendrix in the past. The humor of Grady Hendrix really works for me, Horror Store being my favorite. And I haven't gotten to this one yet. And this is for the prompt, The Killer is Back. Now, I don't know if the killer is back. I really don't know. I don't know that much about this book. But this follows a bunch of final girls who are the final girls from their stories. And they're the only people who have survived, and they have a support group. And then one of their members gets murdered, and they think someone's coming after the group. So I'm wondering if it's a past killer come back. Either way, they've been in the line of a killer, and now they're in a line of another killer. So like the killer is back. It would not be me, and it would not be this channel if somewhere on this TBR there was not a retelling. So we have hit the prompt where I could slot in a retelling. And this prompt is Amateur Sleuth. And I am going to be using The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray. This is a Jane Austen retelling, and it's a murder mystery where all the characters are from Jane Austen's books. I was put onto this series by Leandra from Leandra the TBR Zero. I also know that Julie from Keep Calm with Books and Coffee loved this book, and I want to know what is so amazing about it. I do love a little bit of a cozy murder mystery. I love a retelling. So this should be an easy, kind of quick read and a super fun time for me. So by the time I got this far in planning my TBR, I actually had no books with a serial killer POV, and I don't think I've even had one yet. Like, I just don't think I had one on my physical TBR, and I was unwilling to add anything to my TBR to fill this space. But I did quickly look at my Kindle TBR because, again, those books I will eventually read. They're on my TBR, so I'm not adding anything to the TBR if I plan to read one of them for this challenge. And I searched the word serial into the Kindle because my Kindle has a lot of Stuff Your Day Kindle books. Stuff Your Kindle Day, that's not how it is. Stuff Your Kindle Day books. There we go. That's the order those words are supposed to be in. Anyway, it has a lot of those books on it. And the one thing with Stuff Your Kindle Day books is they put all the tropes in the title because they need you to know what the book is about, like from the title, because you're just competing with so many books on that day. So usually I can like search the word and have a few books pop up that have the word in it. So I searched serial and this one came up and it's called Scratched Off by Julie C. Gilbert. This is called in the title, Scratched Off, a fast-paced, intense mystery novel featuring an FBI agent and a serial killer. That's a long title, but I'm glad it was long because it's how I knew it was on my Kindle to begin with. This is like under 300 pages and what I will be reading for this prompt. For podcast element, I actually had nothing on my TBR that had a podcast element in it because if a thriller has a podcast element, I immediately read it. I am an audiobook reader. I love how podcasts are done in thriller audios and I read them immediately. So I didn't have anything. But I do have a book that has a lot of multimedia aspects in it. One of them could be a podcast. I honestly don't know, but it has a lot of multimedia aspects. And that is Murder in the Family by Cara Hunter. This was doing the rounds when it first came out, which is why I own it. And honestly, because I like podcasts, I do love multimedia elements. So we are, again, stretching the prompt a little bit, but I think it still fits the theme of the prompt. This is the only one that I do not think is technically a mystery or a thriller. It does have mystery listed in the genres on Goodreads, but it's really, really quite low in the list. I think this is a horror. It's a gothic horror, but I was scrounging at this point with physical TBR books. I got this last year in my Advent books. So we're going back to the Advent books, which I still haven't read. We're really getting quite a few of those on the TBR. So for Husband Did It, we just needed a book that the husband is like suspected of something in the book. So I'm using The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. Again, I think this is gothic horror. I do love gothic horror. I am nothing if not a contradiction. I say I don't like horror and then I love gothic horror. I don't know, okay? I don't make sense. I'm contrary. I don't know, but I own this and we're going to read it. The husband is mentioned in the synopsis multiple times. He does crazy things on the night of her wedding, and that's why I picked it. And finally, the last prompt on the board is an unreliable narrator, and I'm going to read a Canadian author of Sherry Lapina and Stranger in the House. I'm surprised I haven't read this. This is quite a backlist by Sherry Lapina, and I've read quite a bit of Sherry Lupina's backlist over the years. But this person is like in a car crash, I think, and can remember nothing from before the car crash or even from the car crash. Like they know no things. I don't even think it says the name of the person. No, it keeps calling them you. So like it's me, but it's not me, obviously. So I don't know. We must be like in the head of the person. And because she doesn't know who she is, we don't know who she is. So how reliable could she possibly be if she doesn't even know who she is? Amnesia trope, very unreliable. So there's my TBR. And honestly, I think after I read all of these books, I will only have maybe like 5 thrillers left on my physical TBR, which is exactly what I wanted this challenge to do. I wanted it to force me to read down my physical TBR, and that is exactly what we're doing. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, but have nothing to say down in the comments, leave me a blood emoji for all these thrilling books that I'm about to be reading. Thank you again to Alexis for making this bingo board. I know a lot of work can go into making these challenges, and they are so fun for us to participate in, so I really appreciate all the work that you did behind the scenes to bring this challenge to light. And thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see me on the challenge of actually reading these now that I've made the bingo board, because now it's time to start vlogging and work my way through these and see if they actually have the prompts that I said they have for. I think they do. I think I did a pretty good job, but I actually have to read them and see which ones I like, what I think of them, and all that stuff. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so that you can follow that journey, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.